I don't think you expect to get paid just because someone's on your website or they're touring homes online, looking at photos and photography and virtual tours that are online. Um, I want to take it to the next slide because I would love for Leo and Holly to talk about what is working with a buyer. What does that look like? And when does now that you want to get paid, when does that trigger, right? So, Holly, can you talk to us a little bit about that? What
For
triggers
sure.
working with the buyer?
Truly, when you start to take those next steps, just actually, introducing a buyer to a property is not enough to get paid. You actually have to take action in moving them through the process, touring the property either in person or virtually. Let's kick it back to when we were in COVID. A lot of us went out and we were doing, FaceTime videos through homes and things of that nature. That would be proactive on behalf of the buyer. And the minute you start to act as that representative of them, as a proponent for, hey, does this work for your needs? How do you like to live in your home? All of those types of questions. The minute you start asking those, that's that threshold of you've got to have a buyer broker. Merely sending things off the MLS is not enough. It doesn't warrant a buyer broker. And so, really, as you start down that path with a singular focus of finding the right property to match that buyer's need, that's when a buyer broker is triggered. And it's really mindful of how you start to convey your services, because your services are not just unlocking the door, it's everything that you bring after that. It's how you talk about the property, educate them on the neighborhood, educate them on schools, educate them on, utilities and taxes and everything that's going on in that community, and then negotiation strategies. Once you start down that kind of conversation with anyone, you've got to have that buyer broker signed.
Yeah, absolutely. And Leo, can you talk to us about, this concept of exclusive agreements versus non-exclusive and just all the different types of agreements that are out there right now?
Yeah, and before we move on, just to touch on the previous slide, it goes back to explaining what true value proposition is. So, I've had agents, especially after the last call, message me directly and say, hey, do we need a buyer broker if someone's in our CRM and we're dripping on them? No, right? It's exactly what Holly said. It's once you start acting as a fiduciary, right? It's you're unlocking doors, you're advising on the condition, the physical obsolescence of the HVAC, and you start giving advice and putting yourself out there. That's when you need to make sure that you are representing the parties, right? And it's very important to educate the buyer that the listing agent is not representing you. They are representing the seller, and as long as you're not breaking any rules of disclosure with latent material defects, anything in use, and Holly said it on our very first call, and she said it on the second call, anything you say will be used against you. You're an all cash buyer. You have to be in the property in 10 days. You're highly, highly motivated to find the house. That's why you need a buyer's agent representing your interest. But on to the next slide about exclusive representation, open representation. Again, some of you have seen me. I wear a shirt once in a while when doing these, and I talk about treat your buyer like you treat your seller. We're very comfortable with the concepts on the listing side, and for a lot of us, having representation agreements is not something we were used to. But in the listing side, you have an exclusive listing agreement, which states, any buyer procured during that period of time that consummates on that property will be paid, will be paying a commission to the seller. Same with the buy side. If you have an exclusive buyer agency agreement for a said period of time, any property that buyer buys would be owed a commission per the agreement. Now we're seeing the introduction, and we wrote one, of open agency agreements where they could be designed for a limited period of time or a limited property, like a one-time transaction. So think of it as they're exclusive while you rendered services. So they could be exclusive to only the properties you've showed them. And so if they buy something else that you did not unlock that door and were there at the time of showing, then there's no commission owed. And we've said this from the beginning, there is going to be this messy middle till we get to a new normal, where I guarantee you there will be cases that go to court and they will set precedent. They will vary from state to state. states will come out with rules addressing the problems, because this is what happens anytime there's a massive shift. Um, so be very well versed in the forms you're using, what they mean, and how you're protected if they need to be enforced. And that's what your brokers are here for. That's what we're here for. So you really need to understand what it is you're signing with your customers, and make sure that your customers understand. Because imagine that they sign something else with a different company, or let's say a touring agreement that some companies have rolled out, and don't specify who, when, where, when monies are due.
Yeah,
Feel free to
absolutely.
chime in, Holly or Kendall there.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, going through an open house, because this is a conversation or a question we get asked a lot. You're holding the house open for the seller. You're there on behalf of the seller. It's that moment in time, and you'll see it, right? Where a buyer goes, I really want to buy this house. At that time, because you're there on behalf of the seller, you're representing the seller solely. If you choose to cross that threshold and represent the buyer, that's when you have to have the buyer agreement signed. The seller may not want you to represent the buyer, and that's a conversation you'll have to have during your listing appointment. You may not want to represent that buyer just because of risk liability, and you may recommend to them that they should go get an agent to help guide them through the process, and that you're not able to. Those are all on the table for you as you go forward. By the way, those have always been on the table for you. That this is not new. This is just articulating more to the consumer about the choices that they have to make properly in their home buying experience. So it becomes really important. Now, one of the questions on this slide, I really want to make sure that we're hitting, Kendall,
Oh, we're
and
gonna hit
it's
all these
okay.
actually.
Great, let's
Give me
go,
a
man. Like,
second.
these
Yes,
are
because
awesome.
yeah. So, thank you, Holly and Leo, for also addressing Tanisha's question. How do open houses work? And just to clarify, Tanisha, if you're the listing agent, you can still hold a house open on behalf of the sellers, what Holly just explained, without needing a buyer rep agreement, right? So I remember reading through the question. Someone said, do I need to have a buyer rep for every client that or person that comes through an open house? The answer to that is technically no, you do not. However, once, like Holly said, and Leo, that you start to do more work for them, and you're actually working for them and working with them, you definitely need an agreement as quickly as possible, especially and if possible prior to showings, in order to get paid. Now, the second question on that side is, what about clients and buyers we are working with now but may not close for a couple of months, submitted by Deborah? What's the process for them now? If you don't have an agreement today, what do you do after August 17th?
I think it becomes really important because to have the conversations today. I probably, like many of you, I was around friends and family over the weekend, and I had a lot of questions, real estate related. And they were like, "Hey, this lawsuit and the commissions, and is this right? And what does this look like?" It's really important to be having those open conversations with the buyers you're working with presently, and let them know how you get paid and what is today, and show them this is how things work. But also, we know that some listings, NAR changed the rule back in October of 2023, that said you don't have to offer compensation in the MLS. So we do have some listings that are at zero. It's important to have those open conversations with your clients that you're working with today, and having a buyer broker, and then explaining how you can obtain a credit from the seller to offset the fee that you're owed by the buyer, or to pay it in full as part of the negotiations. The worst case scenario, honestly, is to be working with a buyer and they haven't found that quite right home yet, and August 17th happens, and you find that quite right home, and oh my gosh, you don't have anything signed, and you just did months of work with no compensation attached. So why not have the conversation up front? You're being proactive. You are that expert in the market. Why not prepare people for what to expect, so they are your walking, talking billboards? They trust you. They're working with you on purpose. So why not go ahead and have that explanation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree. I think go ahead and start using agreements today. Don't wait until August 17th. Now, Leo, for those agents that have pending contracts today that don't close until after August 17th, do you recommend that they still go ahead and get a buyer brokerage agreement right now?
I think it never hurts, right? I mean, I did it 10 years ago. If you have it all outlined, it absolutely, it's beneficial. It outlines everything. And then that way, when the change comes, there's nothing for you to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And this next question, this one's a hot one, which is what about buyers wanting to revise their agreement? And I'm going to by submitted by Susan. And then I'm going to pair that with L. Sutherland's question, which is can we have more than one buyer agreement with each buyer client? So, in other
The
words,
answer is
one per
probably.
construction.
Yeah. The short answer is absolutely. Agreements can be revised by both parties as long as they're in writing. So, can you revise your buyer broker? If you go to meet with a buyer and you put down a certain amount, and then you decide you're going to new home construction and they're offering more, and the buyer says, heck yeah, I want you to get paid more, then memorialize that. You can do it very simply by taking the current agreement, striking through what you currently have, everybody initial and date, and then the new amount that you're going forward with. Very simple to do. Or you can withdraw that agreement and do a new one. Completely up to you. The other thing you can consider is having two agreements, one for residential resale and one for new home construction. Our single property buyer broker allows for that. So the single property buyer broker you could actually utilize for new home construction. Especially if the builder is offering a higher percentage, or maybe they're offering a bonus that you didn't account for in your other agreement. You can do all of those things. The key to the kingdom in all of this is transparency to the client. Did you have the conversation before you showed the property? Did you have it, and did you memorialize it in writing? That's the whole key to this. If you do those things, you're going to be fine.
Love that. Leo, any thoughts on that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think the more clarity and transparency and documentation, right? I've had a lot of people reach out and say, "Hey, if I need to enforce one of these, will you represent me in court? Will you have my back?" And the
Mm.
answer is yes, but the more documentation that's clear and concise. So I'd say put on your principal's hat from when we all took our licensing courses, and it said that the notes you have, the text messages, all that stuff will be part of enforceability. So if you are changing agreements, and Holly specifically explained how to do it, just know that I think always creates the possibility for confusion. And so the more clarity around the process and the goal and the why is important in my opinion.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, I just want to remind everyone that is what your local state broker is for guidance, and and clarity and helping you navigate all of this, right? So don't get bogged down in the minutia in the sense of like, overthinking everything. When it's just like how we always say, and when in doubt, disclose, right? So those are things that you want to keep at the forefront of your head. Now, another great question is if the seller is offering more than you agreed to in the buyer agreement, who gets the difference, the seller or the buyer? Submitted by Shay.
It depends. If the seller up front is offering more and your buyer broker agreement asks for all of it, maybe you ask for it by a concession, but let's say your buyer broker is, and I'm going to use real numbers here. These are purely subjective. You choose your own. We want you to be in business for yourself. So let's say your buyer broker is at 2.5. The seller's offering 3. You write a concession in the contract for 3. That remainder, that 0.5, goes to the buyer for whatever they choose. You get paid your 2.5. You're capped. Now, if you only ask for 2.5 as a concession in the contract, that 0.5 stays with the seller. So it depends on how you write the contract. It depends on how you negotiate. This is all about a professional's market and how we negotiate and strategize with our clients up front and what makes the most sense for them. It also, what's going on in the market? What do we know about the property? Everything about real estate is local and relationship based. So everything that you do in communicating with the other side, in negotiating strategy, that all makes a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, Leo, what if a buyer simply just won't sign a buyer brokerage agreement? Should the agent disengage?
Yeah, I think it's part of an education process. I will probably sound like a broken record, but what if a seller won't sign a listing agreement? Do you take the listing? And the answer is flat out no, because structurally, that's how the rules are built. And we are entering an era where buyer representation will very much mirror listing representation. So the concept of taking a listing without a signed listing agreement is impossible because in order to submit it into the MLS, you need that. That's part of the rules of engagement. That's what's happening, right? The enforcing, and we're going to talk about that next, is coming at the MLS level. We don't have the clear answers of what the process is going to be. Do we need to upload something? But to submit a listing into the the MLS has the right to ask for a signed listing agreement. I guess it's going to very much mirror that process. So yes, super long-winded answer for yes. I would not work with a buyer who refuses to sign a buyer DC agreement because you're basically agreeing to work for free with no, you still owe and rendered fiduciary responsibilities that you now took on liability for, and no compensation is not a good idea.
Yeah, absolutely. And also too, I would encourage agents, like, just because someone over the phone says they're not going to do something, don't be discouraged by that. Have the meeting, build the relationship first before you start, obviously, before you can do any work for them, because you'll be surprised once you show them through, sharing your value proposition, sharing with them how working with you is going to be in their best interest and how you're going to help them. You'll be surprised how often people can be moved by, a logical, tangibly explained concept that's just new to them. So, don't be afraid to have the conversations, because you'll be surprised. Some people will be moved by them and will take the desired action, i.e., signing an agreement to work with you exclusively, if you present them the option and opportunity. So this last question here, I think, is we might have already addressed it, but I'll read it just in case. How does the NAR settlement impact real estate professionals' ability to create video walkthroughs to promote other agents' listings on social media? Specifically, if I have reached out to an agent and asked them if I can take a short video to promote their listing on social media platforms such as YouTube or Instagram. And I think the question here is meant to ask, can I still do that? Or do I need some sort of a buyer rep agreement in order to do that?
The answer is yes, you can still do that. You're truly doing work for free. So you can proceed with doing that. I think the minute you start to engage a specific client in going out and shooting video for them and pointing out certain pieces of a property or importance to them, that's when you got to have the buyer broker. But if you're doing just a general mass, promotion, no, that's advertising and showcasing your video skills.
Love it. Thank you.
Absolutely, and I think that goes back to where we opened, right? You're still going to do marketing activities, dripping on CRM, sending people comps for their subdivision if you're trying to get a listing. None of that changes. But where that question I think is very relevant is in the world, post COVID, where we sell homes virtually, right? Where there is a decent percentage of transactions on the buy side that actually happen without the buyer physically setting foot. I live in Miami. I see that quite a bit. So there's a big distinction, and I just want to answer the question directly of you prospecting leads on the internet by generating content versus rendering fiduciary services to a buyer. So if a buyer's reached out and said, hey, I want to see 123 Main Street, but I'm currently overseas, send me a video. And based on what you narrate and show me, you are then going to procure an offer. That I would not do until I have a buyer broker agreement.
Love it. This is good, guys, isn't it? Are you getting your questions answered? I mean, I feel like this has been so great. And so thank you so much. We have a few more questions to keep going through, but hang in there with us. We will probably get to yours next, or a version of yours. These first two I'm going to combine. The question, this is related to commissions. Obviously, any word yet on how VA buyers will be able to have representation, being we can't charge them a commission or fee, and then living in Atlanta, Georgia, wrote, what options do VA buyers have? So we have some hot off the press
Yeah.
information that we get to share here, since we recorded our original 60-day update. So Leo, can you talk to us about VA buyers, because I know you've been behind the scenes advocating and talking to them about how we can manage this new
Yeah, so
normal.
there's a temporary solution, but we're looking for a more permanent one. I'm going to let Holly answer it because I know she's been very close to it, and I joined Holly on a couple of the military group updates, and I was
That's
taking
awesome.
notes just as feverishly as the agents because she's so well versed in it.
Well, we are not leaving our veterans behind. The modernization of the VA loan was definitely coming, and that has been something being worked on behind the scenes. And so, truly, shout out to Leo for all of his calls in to the members of the VA board and so forth. There was a lot of advocacy across the U.S. We did see a temporary solution where they can be represented and they can pay their agent. So a lot of times, because these are 100% loans, we're asking for concessions. Okay, great. It's just like an FHA. We're going to ask for the concessions in the contract to offset that buyer broker. We are going to see a more permanent fix. And solution released mid-June. And so we'll be updating you all here on exactly what that looks like and actually what action steps to take in the marketplace, how to educate your clients. As soon as we get that information, we're going to break it down and make it bite-sized so we all can work on it together. But right now, exactly like you're going to do for your first-time home buyers getting FHA or USDA, you get that buyer broker signed, and if they want support from a seller in offsetting that fee, great. Ask for the concession as part of the contract negotiations to offset the fee, and away you go.
Yeah, and what's nice is this temporary fix is going to allow a VA buyer to have the choice on whether they want to pay you or not. I think too, it's important to note that a lot of people assume, especially sellers for some reason, that just because a VA borrower takes advantage of their benefit, right, of the VA loan, that they may not have resources. And that's not true. There are lots of VA buyers who have resources as well and want to be able to have a voice and a choice on their representation, and who they want to work with and what they feel is a reasonable amount of money that they'd be willing to pay for that. So that's a great thing. Mid-June we're going to get that detail ironed out, which is really exciting. And I'm happy that VA borrowers will have a choice in what they decide they want to do, if they want to ask a seller to pay for their representation or take care of it themselves. This next question is from Michelle. So, if procuring cause is no longer the case, can buyers sign multiple buyer brokerage agreements to see different properties or different areas?
I'll jump in here. The answer is it depends, right? So if there are various forms, including the ones we've created, that are specific to a property, to a single property or a small period of time. So let's just assume an agent is working with multiple agents in seeing singular properties. In my opinion, that would be acceptable, right? But I promise you that there's going to be different forms being signed by different, both, you know, buyers and agents presenting them, and there will be confusion. This is what
Mhm.
I keep saying, that in the initial shift, I expect issues, right? And this is why we're spending so much time putting this information out there for you guys. So it's going to be very important that as you're educating a consumer and asking them, have you signed other buyer brokerage agreements? Are they exclusive, right? Because ultimately, anytime there's a rule change, there is litigation, and then there is case law, right? So anytime someone says, well, how do you enforce that? It goes to court. a court makes a decision, and then that becomes the precedent as to how things go. So over disclosure, over communication is what I'd be doing right now. Ask people, have you signed anything else like this? And explain to them, if we sign this and you buy with somebody else, if it's exclusive, there is an enforceability aspect to this. So it depends what you sign. So if it's exclusive, I would explain the definition of exclusivity. If it's not exclusive, I would explain the definition of not being exclusive and what, freedom or rights they have to work with other agents or they do not. So I think it all comes down to being the source of education, right? I think educating will attract. If you're confident and well-versed in how to handle the situation and other folks are not, that will give you an advantage in this shift.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And DJ team asks, can we put up to a percentage and up to a bonus amount? And I'm just going to take this one for us. And the answer is no. As we stated in a previous slide, your compensation must be definitive and it must, also state where it's going to come from. So, like Holly explained earlier in the call, you can have an agreement for new construction because that's typically where bonuses are offered, although it can be offered by a seller. And you would have to revise your agreement if it was going to include a specific amount. So it's going to be really important, I would say this to buyer's agents, to do your homework before showing properties, right? Make sure you reach out to the listing agents. Are sellers proffering anything? Are sellers willing to negotiate, and at least have that information and be armed with that knowledge so that you can properly educate your buyer, right? As you're going through showings and working with them. This next question.
And Kendall, before we go, I just want to jump in there because there is going to be a messy in the middle. And just because somebody tells you no doesn't mean you take it as face value.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, how many times have we called a listing agent and said, hey, I'm wondering, do the washer and dryer convey? And they're like, no, they absolutely don't. You still put it in the contract, and guess what the buyer gets? The washer and dryer, because the seller may change their mind depending on the day, depending on the way the contract is written. It's all a negotiating strategy. And that's what you bring to the table in everything that you do. So just because you get a no, when you know or understand everything that's going on in the context of that marketplace, and you're able to communicate that clearly to your buyer, the strategy of how you write your offer, how you present it, how you go forward, it gives you great leverage. So don't be afraid of a no. It's like that movie quote. So you're saying there's a shot if it's 1,000,000 to 1, right? Like that's where I want you to think. Like there's a way forward in all of this.
You're absolutely right. And, I said this, I absolutely agree with you. So I do think that agents, now commission is a negotiation tool, right? That it wasn't before, right? It wasn't a part of the negotiation between buyers and sellers before. And now it's an incentive even to a buyer that, it didn't exist before. So it's a new world we're navigating. And so I think this is going to be a really interesting opportunity for agents to learn and perfect skills that perhaps they didn't even know they had. So new construction processes typically to register a buyer at the front desk at the sales office. We call it a buyer registration with the developer. It's a standard confirmed that the developer will pay the commission to the broker. In this case, is the buyer broker representation agreement still required? And if yes, is the percentage of commission required on the agreement?
Yes. Why would you take that risk? Yes. And I know that sounds like overkill, but why wouldn't you? If you are taking a buyer out and you're having them sign a buyer broker for everything else but this one subdivision, why would you do that carve out? That creates a cloud of confusion for the consumer. Why go there? Why not be specific and help them understand? I think that a lot of times through this process, especially as we're waiting for the new rule to take effect, a lot of agents are trying to find the simple path, the easy way. And I will share with you that because as an industry, we're all making this change together, the easy way is doing the right thing. The easy way is educating the consumer. And the more proactive and articulate we become, and Leo said this earlier, the better we are for the consumer, and the more trusted advisor we become for them in this process. So explain it early, explain it often, and really don't look for an easy, sidestep. Oh, I'm not going to have it signed here, but I'll have it signed over here. That kind of confusion is not good for the consumer and not good for your business ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And Leo, this next question is: after agreeing with the buyer on a fee at the beginning of the process, can the buyer broker agreement be amended to change the fee to 0% if the seller agrees to pay the buyer agent commission?
That's a good question, and I think it's just understanding what the buyer broker agreement is, right? So the seller, as part of the concessions, can pay the whole buyer agency agreement fee. That fee, if you reduce it to zero, you're only allowed to earn zero. So don't do that. So if the intent is, I don't want my buyer to be out of pocket, and the seller is willing through concessions cover the whole fee, whatever it is, percentage flat fee, fill in your choice. You do not amend it down to zero, or then you're not allowed to earn anything. So what your goal would be is to have part of the offer, have the seller concessions cover the same amount that's in this line of the buyer broker, and do not negotiate down to zero. You are allowed to earn zero.
Absolutely. MLS enforcement. So, real brief, who's monitoring if you have a representation agreement or not from Linda? And then how might the MLS enforce these new rules? Unknown. Who'd
Well,
like to
let me
jump on
paint a
that one?
scenario for you. So I go to show a house this afternoon and the new rule is in place. And I'm talking to the client. And they're like, oh, yeah, we saw the one up the street. Really? Who did you see that with? Oh, we saw it with Kendall. Oh, gosh. Well, I need you to sign this before I can open the store. Well, Kendall didn't make us sign it. Really? Kendall didn't have you sign anything before she opened that door. If I'm trying to procure the buyer, I may end up turning Kendall into the multiple listing service saying, hey, she doesn't have the proper paperwork. And it's very much like the clear cooperation. I saw a listing posted, it's not in the MLS, they're doing something wrong, and then there's an investigation. And so with the MLS enforcement, what we're being told is the MLS will then call Kendall and say, hey, it looks like you hit the lockbox on this date. Would you please send over the buyer broker agreement for the client that you showed? And if she doesn't have one, she's likely to get fined or have other penalties. And so it's very similar to back in the day when the MLS first kind of evolved. And I know some of us are like, well, that was a long time ago. They asked for our listing agreements. You actually submitted your listing agreements to the multiple listing service. And at any given day, they could still ask for those. So this is not new. It's just an evolution of where we're at. And so the MLS, we will likely see agents turn each other in. Okay. And then there will be asks for that paperwork.
Yes, and NAR has given the MLS the authority in order to enforce this rule to be able to request a copy of your buyer brokerage agreements or buyer rep agreements. The other thing too that, may or may not evolve into this, and people have very mixed feelings about this, is there may one day potentially be a buyer registry where we have to register buyers in some fashion. I don't know what that looks like. That's not on the table right now, but things are constantly evolving. And so the one thing we have to learn through all of this or expect is that change is happening and that we have to adapt. And so I think it's important that people remember that things will evolve and we'll get clarity. There'll be new developments. There will be lawsuits potentially, who knows, like as the messy middle, trying to figure things out. And as we, learn, we will adapt. And that's the one thing you can count on at EXP is we are agile and we will adapt. We will learn and move forward. So take courage and be brave in that, right? And understand that that is going to happen. So, and then the other thing, not only might we see fines for MLS, but we might see suspensions, right? So it doesn't always have to be a financial penalty. It could be a suspension. So I know there was a question at one point, like, someone said their specific MLS doesn't do fines, well, they may suspend you where you can't access the MLS for some reason. Who knows what their penalties will be? They will let us know. And you will need to pay attention as these implications evolve, that your local MLSs will develop standards. They will put them in writing and they will disclose them to you ahead of time. That is one thing you should expect. And for all of us, that we might expect as a result of this. And then one more meaty topic, working with sellers. This one's a big one too. And then we're almost done, guys. So working with sellers. Will the sellers then be choosing offers based on the buyer's agent fees as well as the offer price? Couldn't that be detrimental to our buyers? That was a great question from, I hope I'm saying her name right, Cassia. And, does anyone want to touch that one first before I read the next?
It's a great question. And I think that it's all in marketplace. What will the market support? We're already seeing about 50% of the transactions nationally have some sort of a concession attached. And what we've heard from the GSEs, Fannie Mae, Ginnie Mae, even FHA, they've all come out and said that they believe the buyer side commission is holistically part of the sales price at present. If we start to see that not be a part of, they anticipate sales prices to drop. So because at the end of the day, this is all net to your seller. If the seller is going to give a concession to the buyer and potentially the concession includes buyer broker compensation, what is their net? If I'm sitting down with the seller, and most recently I did, really good past client, we worked through, okay, what is his net? What is important to him? What can we expect from buyers in this price range, in this market, being asked, asking him to participate in everything from home warranty to HOA fees, maybe painting the roof, whatever, those types of repairs. In addition to, I educated him on the rule change that was coming forward. And so we had that conversation in advance, and we went back to his net, what was important to him. And that's the biggest thing. In every state, it's really critical that you're pulling a net proceeds sheet for your sellers so they have an understanding of what's going on and they can make a really good business decision about their bottom line. It's never about gross. It's always about net.
Absolutely. And then I'm going to answer these next two. And then Leo, I want you to do the last one on this page. So seller can still pay a commission to the buyer side, correct? Yes, that is correct. A seller can still pay a commission to the buyer side. It just can't be advertised in the MLS. Is that right? Yes, Andrea, that is correct. So which takes me to the next question. At the listing appointment, can we still talk to sellers about the buyer agent commission or compensation? The answer to that is yes, you can. That way we know before we hit the market, sure, no problem. And can we put it in the confidential remarks? The answer to that is no. So in most, in any NAR, any MLS that's opted into the NAR settlement, they will be removing all fields regarding commissions. They may be adding a concessions field where you can identify concessions that are being offered by a seller. But as far as hiding compensation in the public remarks, the realtor remarks, or confidential remarks, you should avoid doing that. I think that there's a high likelihood that that will call attention and you will likely get into trouble with your local MLS if they are following the new rules. So I think we're good on that answer. Holly and Leo?
Yeah, just from what we understand, there's a seller concession field coming to an MLS near you. Use the appropriate fields, because the listing appointment, I think it's very important. The listing agent is educating the seller purely of how buyer compensation worked prior to and how it works post, because educating a seller and saying, hey, this is no longer offered, but expect it to come with an offer and it's a point of negotiation, is part of the education talk track, right? Saying this is how it used to be, this is how it is, and to expect it is part of the education. Because if you tell a seller, hey, this is no longer offered, and you don't give them a heads up, it's probably going to be an education process with offers in front of them. Um, and no one likes being surprised with material information.
Yeah, and absolutely. And this last question, we just got this one, so I added this at the last minute, and I think it's a really good one. And so, how did the new rules work with existing listings? Will this change the amount of compensation that the seller will provide to the listing agent? I currently have a listing and I'm offering a percentage to the co-broker. Will this mean we need to drop the cooperating broker compensation and still keep the listing agreement at the same amount? Or will the listing agreement compensation need to be reduced? I think this is a good practical, tactical question that a lot of agents are going to need an answer to prior to August 17th.
100%. And I think that what you can expect from us at EXP is we will have a form for you to take to your seller. Many of the state forms, many of the MLS forms, as far as the listing agreements, did not unbundle the offer of compensation that was received from a seller. It didn't have seller side and buyer side. It just put it all together. And so you've got this messiness. We've been advocating for a while now to unbundle what you charge as a listing agent. If you go into a listing this afternoon, I want you to talk about you, what you bring to it, and what your fee is. And then you have a conversation of what might the market support, what the seller would like to do if a buyer's agent requests a fee. What would that look like? But yours is set. You and that seller negotiate your fee. So the form that will be coming out, and you'll have to have signed prior to the adjustments in the MLS, basically reestablishes the fee that you work for, and if there's going to be any offer of compensation to a potential buyer. And of course, that's subject to them asking for it via the contract or directly. We will have a form that we're finalizing right now, will be uploaded to SkySlope, designed for buyers agents, if their buyer directs them to contact the listing agent and say, is your seller paying a fee? If so, I'm going to send this over. So it's a direct pay form from the seller to EXP as the buyer broker, and that will be done at close of escrow. And so that's something that is absolutely out there and available. As Leo said earlier in our call, we don't want you sharing commissions. There is no such thing as a shared commission. I get paid X and I split that with the buyer agent. That's gone. That really needs to go away. That's what got us into these lawsuits. And so the mindset you have as a listing agent, which you get paid as a listing agent, we will have that form for you that will probably be releasing here towards end of June, so you can make those modifications as you're meeting with sellers and things of that nature, and adjusting your current listings prior to the rule change in August. Now, for those of you going out and taking listings, um, we found that some of the states are not adjusting as quickly as they need to, and we believe in being proactive on your behalf. So we will have our own listing agreement. We're rolling out one for California first, here, first part of June. What's so important to us about that is we don't believe any consumer should sign something that is not clear to them. And we believe in a very straightforward um, process, a very straightforward form that is easy to explain, that even any layperson can read it and go, all right, I know what I'm signing up for. And that's what we're doing with our listing agreement. So California, that's coming at you very soon. We've got other states that are lined up in the queue, and we will be releasing nationwide as we go forward. So we're really passionate about taking care of you as you go out and work with consumers.
And speaking of documents coming soon, this leads nicely into this last slide of questions, which, you can see there are some coming soon forms for your business that Holly actually just referenced, as well as others. Nancy asked, do we have an updated buyer agreement yet? We are actively working on it. It is, I'll say, almost imminent. It'll be out very, very soon.
Yeah, you should see it in SkySlope. We'll be doing a big marketing push. You should see it in SkySlope. We're hoping next week for our buyer broker, the exclusive buyer broker. And that Vanilla Luke, that is the multi-showing form. And the single property is already in SkySlope, Lynette, so you can find it there. If you go into SkySlope, you look at forms, and then you will want to add the EXP library as well as your EXP state library. And when you do both of those things, you'll get all the forms that you need, and that will allow you to go forward.
Awesome. And then we have the question, will the new EXP buyer rep include a section where it states the broker is to only show properties where a seller concessions is allowed? I'm going to give that one to you, Holly, because I know you've been specifically working on this document.
Yeah, we're going to show all properties the buyer directs us to. See, at the end of the day, we are consumer focused, and this is up to the consumer. And so the consumer can say, even though the seller's not willing to compensate, I want to see that property. And so as a result, our form specifically says, as you direct, we will show, and we will earn this fee. So we're very specific on that.
Yeah. And this last question also connected to, and I feel again, we've technically answered it, but just to clarify, how do we modify the existing listing agreement to delete the co-brokerage compensation? Because that will be required prior to August 17th. If your listing agreement does reference co-broke compensation in the MLS, you will need to modify your listing agreement prior to the 17th. And so do we cross it out and get the seller's initials, or get an addendum, or a brand new listing that's a revised agreement? Should that be signed? So,
I'm not a big fan of a brand new listing agreement unless you absolutely need it. I think an addendum is going to be just fine or insufficient. And that listing modification form will act as that addendum, like updating the form for everybody. So we've got a very clear signature of what is happening. And it'll have some disclosures as to the why behind it. So I'm going to lean in hard there. Now, can you go back to the original agreement and cross out what's there and everybody initial and date? Of course you can. What's clean, what's easy, what's enforceable, it's always got to be in writing, and it's always got to be understandable, and all parties have to sign off on it.
absolutely. In fact, I have two lawyer sayings that I've had since forever, and I brought them into real estate. One, don't just think it, ink it.
Yep.
And number two, if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So make sure you get those things in writing. So as we wrap up, Leo, any final words or thoughts from you, Leo, as we close out today?
That I spend most of my waking hours with this team thinking through this, right? I've been asked on earnings calls, I've been asked on podcasts, like, hey, what's your thoughts on as CEO for the remaining of the year? And it's actually this. It's making sure that you guys have all the tools, all the education, right? Because when you're out in the field, you need to be confident in the answers you give to buyers and sellers as to how you're supposed to navigate this while being compliant. Because the thing about the word compliance is enforceability, right? We still don't have clear understanding of what that be. Some MLSs could literally, as the brokerage, asked us to send the commission back and not compensate anybody. It could be fines. It could be suspension. So if it starts to feel like this is what we talk about a lot, it's because we want to protect you guys. We want to empower you guys and have you ready for the shift so you can lead the way proactively, not reactively, and be able to educate not only consumers, but the other agents you're going to be in transactions with.
Absolutely. So thank you everyone so much. Thank you, Holly. Thank you, Leo. You two are amazing, great leaders. It is an honor and a privilege for myself to be in your orbit and to be able to work with you all through this. And I'm just very grateful for that. But for our audience, I just want to remind you that we'll continue to bring you the latest updates, answers, and resources as they become available to us. We'll also want you to know we plan to continue this conversation. We want to keep you informed. So please stay tuned for webinars, live discussions, as well as email notifications on what's happening next. We appreciate you. We appreciate your feedback, your support, and we thank you. So thank you for your questions. And again, I want to remind you, if your question didn't get answered today, that's okay. Don't worry. Over time, we will be addressing